All the miseries and evil which men suffer from vice, crime, ambition, injustice, oppression, slavery, and war proceed from their despising or neglecting the precepts contained in the Bible. That is something that Noah Webster wrote in 1832 in his school textbook, History of the United States. And it forms the basis of the ideas that I have that I want to talk about as regards to supercommunicators, Charles Duhigg's new book. Now, I was super excited to jump into this book. I've read both of Charles's other works, and I really, really love them. The Power of Habit was fascinating. And his second one, Faster something, I don't remember what, but it was really good as well. I really enjoyed both of those. So I was so pumped to get into this, how to unlock the secret language of connection. I'm like, man, this book is going to be great. And I get it and I start reading it, and it started out pretty good, and then I kind of keep going, and I'm like, man, something's just not sitting right with me about this, and I don't entirely know what it is. And then by the time I finished the book, I got to the afterword, and I read the afterword, and I was like, this is what the problem is. This is why I don't like this book. And so that's what I want to talk about. I want to start at the end of this book. So he goes through all the tips and tricks of how to be this super communicator, and then in the afterword, he talks about the why. So the why portion that he talks about comes from a thing called the Grant Study. This is also known as the Harvard Study of Adult Development, right? This is one of the longest studies of a group of people that has ever happened. It initially started out with a salesman who, his name was Grant, and he gave $7 million to study these young men at college, study all of the aspects of their lives, and study them for years and years and years going on ahead to try to figure out what makes a successful life, to look at all of the data and see if they could find commonalities amongst people who are successful, right? It went for about 16 years, then it ran out of funding. 20 years later, somebody comes back and is like, hey, let's get this thing going again and check in with all these people again. So they go and they check in with everybody again. Now, the interesting thing that he talks about is there was two examples of two different guys. The first guy's name was Godfrey Camille, and the other guy was John Marsden. So what was interesting was at the beginning of this study, Godfrey Camille was just a complete loser. And it was just like, if you look at his life and they're not supposed to project anything, right? But you're just like, this guy is going nowhere. He's just a complete and utter loser. And if you look at John Marsden, he is like top of the game. He's killing it in every area. He's the one that's going to be, he's going to take over the world. So they have this 20-year break. They come back and they study these guys again. So they go and they interview Camille Godfrey. And in the decades between the two studies, he had become a totally different person. He's now in his 50s, married, a leader in his church. He'd won over Boston's medical establishment by founding a large independent clinic that specialized in allergy treatments. He was a nationally recognized expert on asthmatic patients. All this stuff. He at 80, he threw himself a potluck birthday party and more than 300 people showed up at his memorial service. The church was packed. He died this incredibly happy, successful, competent, wonderful life lived, right? And the other guy, Marsden, who had started out so great, they come and they study him, and he was in terrible shape when they found him. He was in his 50s. He was divorced. He was alienated from his children, his family. His law practice was successful, but he had few friends and spent most of his time alone. He was angry, lonely, and disappointed most of his life. He eventually remarried, but the relationship was loveless, and it was terrible and awful, right? So they take all this new data now. We have 16 years of original data, a 20-year break, and now we have all the new data from them. And they come to this conclusion. They say, however, as important as these other factors were, one thing seemed to matter much more than anything else. It didn't come as a surprise. It had been obvious to everyone across the decades as they had conducted their interviews. The most important variable in determining whether someone ended up happy and healthy or miserable and sick was how satisfied they were in their relationships, one researcher wrote. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest mentally and physically at age 80. Another researcher put it more bluntly, the most important influence by far on a flourishing life is love. And then Charles sums it up at the very end of the book, because whether we call it love or friendship or simply having a great conversation, achieving connection, authentic, meaningful connection is the most important thing in life. And herein is where we have my problem with this book. It's not necessarily about what Charles wrote or how he wrote it. It's the fundamental idea behind this book. I had the same reaction when I read Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss a couple of years ago. And the review that I wrote for that book was, I said, it's hard for me to say something positive about this book because I look at it and I just feel sad for all the people in it, because the things that you learned in this book that you spent so long and so many years and all this research learning, if you just hadn't discarded the Bible, you would have already known all those things. And when I read this book and I look at what he calls a super communicator, really the thing that stuck out to me is I'm like, dude, this is average. Like, this should be normal. This should be the baseline for everybody. Like, literally, what you are calling a super communicator is someone who is simply just living by the golden rule and doing unto others what I would have them do unto me. So when they're talking, I'm actually listening and I'm matching their energy and their mood, and I'm actually paying attention. And the whole problem with this book is it goes through and it talks about all these things that you can do. And the one caveat that they give is like, you can't just learn to mirror and learn these tricks and learn whatever. The only way to actually listen to someone is to actually listen to them. And the only way to care what someone says is to actually care what someone says, right? So the problem with this kind of a book, and the problem in culture right now that we have, is we misdiagnose the actual problem itself. The problem is not that people don't know how to listen well or whatever. The problem is that we have completely shunned all of Judeo-Christian values, right? And so we can read this book and we get to the end and we're like, oh, love and connection is the most important thing. And I'm like, yeah, it is. So, but what basis do you have for giving love if you haven't ever received any love? What basis do you have for listening to people or valuing people if you don't believe that people are made in the image of God and have something worthwhile and valuable to say? Like, none of this stuff works if the foundation of it is just me being like, oh, well, I need to do this so that I can communicate better to people because, life. Oh, I had such a difficult time with this book because on the one hand, so many things in it are so good. But on the other hand, I'm like, none of this matters if you don't fundamentally believe in the core tenets of Judeo-Christian values. If you don't believe that the purpose of humanity is to love God and love people, then when you try to get here and tell me that the main point of humanity is loving, like, from what? For what? Like, what? How am I supposed to do that? Why should I do that? What's the point? People are just a bunch of jackasses. There's no point. There's no reason. I have no foundation. You have to go deeper than that. So you can't just discard all the Judeo-Christian values that built the society that you want to get back to. You can't return to that without those same foundational things. So if you really want to learn how to become a super communicator, if you really want to learn the secret language of connection, if you really want to learn how to have deep relationships, you have to submit yourself to the way that God made the world. And the most interesting thing about this is in this afterword where they compare these two guys, no one focuses on the fact that Godfrey, the guy who started out terrible and then who ends super well and super connected and whatever, the turning point of his life was he started going to church. And all these great connections and all these wonderful family things and all this stuff that happened in his life, the turning point in his life was he started going to church. And he got connected in his church. And wouldn't you know it, getting connected in his church and coming under the teaching and submitting himself to an ideology and a thought process that says, hey, you know what? I believe God made the world. I believe the way that God made the world is for me to primarily have a love relationship with him, and then secondarily have a love relationship with other people that flows out of my love relationship with him, right? So just maybe read it. I don't know, maybe, but don't go into this thinking that you can fix yourself with any of these things. It's exactly like that Tribe of Mentors book. There's all these tools and all these things. And I'm like, bro, if you had spent 5 minutes reading the book of Proverbs, you could have found this out. And you didn't have to spend $14 billion on this study and 20 some odd years trying to figure all this random crap out and then give all these random stupid ass answers about, oh, it's this and that and this and that and this and that and this and that. Like, wow, you think we're made for love? Really? I do too. You know why I think that? Because that's what the Bible says. And granted, okay, maybe you don't like the Bible, but if you just came to the same conclusion as the Bible, maybe you should reconsider reading the dang thing and seeing what it says. Because every single time you find something over here that actually works and that actually leads to a better life, I'm sitting over here like, well, that's it was right there the whole time. What are you doing, man? So anyways, when average becomes super, this is how everybody should be doing it. Everybody should be able to communicate with people. Everybody should be able to connect with people and care about people, because people are made in the image of God and they have value because of that. And we want to listen to them because of that. And we're able to love them because he first loved us, and we received that love and we're able to give that love and receive it from other people. That should be basic. And the only reason it's not is because everybody's like, screw this. We don't need these things anymore. We don't need these mindsets. We don't need this Bible stuff anymore. We're going to go out here and try to figure it all out for ourselves and come up with a bunch of stupid reasons that are never going to work because there's no foundation to any of them. Rant over.